Good morning. Good morning. My name is Robin Merrill. I'm the Executive Director with Maine Equal Justice Partners. I want to make a brief statement before we get started, and then I'll introduce our speakers this morning. So I want to welcome you. I know that several of you have come from a press conference called by the governor to discuss his proposal to curb the work discouraging effect of the welfare cliff. We are very pleased to see this proposal and the common ground that it creates to finally begin to work toward a bipartisan solution to this problem. As with all policy change, the way this is done matters greatly, and if we are to produce the most effective outcome for families. The governor's approach is different from the one that is presented in LD 1268 that we will be discussing this morning. And I'd ask that you hold your questions on the governor's bill until our speakers have presented their thoughts on what is essential as we work toward real reform. So at this time, we'll be glad to comment on the governor's bill. So first, I would like to introduce Reverend Jill Saxby. She's the chair of the board at Maine Equal Justice Partners, and she's also a practicing attorney. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. We're here in advance of a public hearing later today on LD 1268, which has been introduced by Representative Drew Gattine, to talk about how we can make positive, systematic changes to the way we provide public assistance to low-income families. We're here to talk about moving Maine toward real, common-sense, successful reform. We believe LD 1268 does this because it addresses real barriers to work and the causes of poverty. We all agree that we need to improve the way we help families who are stuck in poverty and receiving assistance. We believe there is a way to build a bridge to sustainable employment and opportunity for Mainers living on the brink and struggling to provide for their families as best they can. Because many Maine families are struggling. They're trying to raise their children or care for a sick or disabled relative while working at low-paying jobs, and there just isn't always enough money to pay the bills. 1 in 5 jobs in Maine pays a wage that leaves a family below the poverty line, and more than 20% of Maine children under the age of 5 live in poor families. Too often and for too long now, government's response to poverty has been to shame working families for needing help. Too often, for too long now, we've created new barriers to receiving help and called it reform. Too often and for too long now, we as a society have been content to blame low wages and hard circumstances on the people working and not on the underlying issues that cause poverty in the first place. We've wasted enough time in the useless exercise of shaming and blaming. It's time for an honest recognition of the fact that Mainers, like many Americans, are working harder and harder, but they're falling behind. And those hardships are the result of deliberate policy choices. So it's time for policymakers to get to work now on real common sense reform. LD 1268 makes it easier for people to transition from welfare to work by gradually reducing benefits as families become more stable. And it improves access to child care and transportation so more people can be available for work and can get to work. The measure of success for any welfare program or for any reform should be how effective it is in moving people out of poverty and into better lives with greater stability, safety, and opportunities, especially for children. Successful reform will ensure a basic living standard. It will protect the well-being of children, domestic violence survivors, people with disabilities, and the elderly. Successful reform will give parents access to the tools they need to find better jobs so they can give their own children a better chance. Successful common sense reform will eliminate barriers to employment, not penalize those who receive assistance because they took a job. It will provide assessment, training, education, and support services needed for people to gain skills and hold jobs that meet their basic needs. Successful, real, common sense reform promotes and supports work while accounting for the reality of the challenges faced by so many Mainers. Proposals that do not move us in this direction should not be labeled welfare reform. Making it harder for families in need to get help would not reform or improve anything. Making public policy based on negative stereotypes about people living in poverty may score political points with some, but it does nothing to move people forward and advance the well-being of Maine families. Simply pushing more families into deeper poverty and calling it reform is something that Maine can no longer afford. Instead, we urge lawmakers to implement evidence-based, common-sense measures such as those in Representative Gattine's bill. We urge them to make it possible for parents and those caring for an elderly or disabled relative to find work, to get a job, and to sustain better lives for themselves and those they take care of. Improving the lives of Maine families is the real welfare reform job at hand. It's urgent, it makes sense, and it's time to get to work. Thank you.
So we'll now hear from Thea Day. Thea is a past graduate of the Parents as Scholars program, and she now works at a national nonprofit assisting others to transition into employment. Thanks, Thea.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. My name is Thea Day. Without the Parents as Scholars program, I really don't know where I would be today. As a single mom with a child with autism and who was also born without a thyroid, I was working very hard and trying to juggle a couple of jobs. I just couldn't make ends meet. The jobs I had, they didn't pay enough. And they made it difficult for me to balance taking care of my child and paying the bills. I knew I had to do something that could give my family a better future and my child more opportunities. A college education was my chance to move my family out of poverty, but there was no way that I could do that without help. There just wasn't enough time, money, or support. Parents and Scholars changed all of that for me and my son. I was able to get my degree with the supports that the program itself offers. Now I have a job where I make enough to support my family and I get to help other people. I'm the social services director for a national nonprofit agency, and I'm able to help other families like mine meet their basic needs. I see a lot of hardships every day. The aid that we give is all emergency based. We work very hard to keep families housed and warm in the winter. And I also help people to learn interview skills and how to write resumes so that they can get jobs. But that kind of help can only go so far if gainful employment is not available, or if a parent lacks the education or training necessary to get the jobs that are available. I believe that everyone has the potential to succeed, but that not everyone has the resources they need to get there. At my agency, we provide a lot of help. We do as much as we possibly can for families. But there's no way that we can do it without working in partnership with the state to provide assistance so people can meet their most basic needs through programs like TANF and the Food Supplement Benefits programs. We work to help people succeed. Unfortunately, there are problems that people face as they try to leave assistance and move into gainful employment. Representative Drew Gattine has introduced a bill this year that is critical to helping people move beyond poverty. The bill breaks down barriers to work and provides necessary support to ensure people who can find a job, they can afford to actually take it. The so-called welfare cliff is a real problem and one that I face personally. Back when I was in school and getting the help that I needed in order to improve my own family's circumstance by getting a college degree, I had a job opportunity. But if I made just $50 more, I would have lost all of the help that I was getting that I needed in order to graduate. That $50 a month would have meant the loss of the one chance I had to move my family out of poverty. So I couldn't take it, I had to turn it down. No family should ever have to make that choice. I see other people in my current work, I see other people face that same situation a lot. If we are committed to moving people out of poverty and into work, we have to make sure that we have the tools and the supports to be successful. And that they're given that opportunity and the chance to actually make it. Thank you.
So we'll now hear from Sandy Butler, Professor of Social Work at the University of Maine in Orono. Thank you, Sandy.
Hi, my name is Sandy Butler. I'm a professor of social work at the University of Maine, and I've been conducting research on families receiving TANF and AFDC prior to TANF for over 20 years. And this research has involved random sample statewide surveys, focus groups, and countless individual interviews. Also with my colleague Louisa DePrez from the University of Southern Maine, I conducted a longitudinal study on the Parents of Scholars program that Clea was just talking about between 1999 and 2006. And more recently, I was involved in an examination of the impact of the 60-month time limit law on TANF for families that were cut off in 2012. These studies have underscored the findings of scholars throughout the country that families receive TANF because they're in crisis caused by domestic violence, by divorce, by loss of job, and health issues. When we are talking about TANF, we're talking about a program that exists to serve children. We must take great care when we make changes to TANF. Whatever is done will ultimately impact some of the most vulnerable children in our state. When we are talking about TANF, we're talking about mothers, often single mothers doing their best to raise children and on their own. 2 days ago, we celebrated Mother's Day. Let's not forget when we talk about TANF, we were talking about moms who love their children and want to do right by them. That is not always easy in today's world. I've drawn 3 important conclusions from my research that are relevant to today's discussion. First, parents receiving TANF want to work, and generally they have worked, and often multiple jobs. Receiving TANF is demeaning. It is never a mother's first choice when she's trying to support her children. Second, most TANF families face barriers that would challenge any of us, but they are facing these barriers with little or no assistance or resources. And finally, punitive measures that focus on punishment and sanctions are counterproductive and only hurt Maine children, and they hurt them badly. We should avoid this approach at all costs. I have studied welfare reform initiatives over the years, and can say with certainty that a measure of successful reform is not one that simply reduces the number of families receiving assistance. Rather, successful reform is a reform that deliberately is designed to raise families out of poverty. Unfortunately, reaching economic stability through sustainable employment is currently out of reach for many families on welfare. But that does not have to be the end of the story. LD 1268 recognizes the reality and responds to it by providing evidence-based strategies and supports to help families gain and sustain employment. LD 1268 offers solutions that all of us intuitively know are successful. Improved access to child care, transportation, education and training, and elimination of the famous welfare cliff. I can tell you from my research that these common sense solutions are proven and successful strategies. We can do better for the families of Maine and the children that live in deep poverty, and LD 1268 does that. It represents welfare reform that is based on sound research, it is compassionate, and it will ultimately lead to improved child and family well-being, greater employment, and greater taxes for this state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll next hear Captain Joel Russ. He's currently working at a community-based nonprofit, but he has a much broader history, as you will hear about.
Good morning. Thank you. I'd like to start by complimenting Maine Equal Justice Partners for their fine work over the years. I think they've done a terrific job of bringing some of these very important social issues to the attention of people here in the state of Maine. I have done a number of things in the state. I was general counsel of the Chamber of Commerce, president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce in Greater Portland, and president and CEO of the Maine Science and Technology Foundation for a number of years, so I'm quite familiar with the environment in which we're presently located. But for the past 10 years, I've been working for organizations, Goodwill, Hinckley, Learning Works, and Seeds of Independence that serve youth experiencing severe challenges in their lives. And frankly, it's been the most rewarding work of my life. Most of these young people grew up in poverty. I saw what great progress people can make when they combine their own personal skills, talents, energy, and aspirations with practical, coordinated, and workable networks of support. So when I think of reform in the context of public benefit programs, I believe it's about improving lives and creating opportunities. To effectively combat poverty, we need changes that focus on success, not failure, and that work to improve the well-being of all of our citizens. Frankly, I've been disheartened by the debate about poverty in recent years, with its focus on unjust stereotypes, punishment, and little or no evaluation of consequences of current policies. That's why I favor the common sense, practical approach that LD 1268 provides. And some of the previous speakers have talked about some of the very practical solution-based suggestions that are in that legislation. But as important as this legislation is, it should be just a start. What Maine needs today is a broad community dialogue about poverty, with full representation of all interested parties, especially those who are most affected by policy decisions. We have to find ways to invite those in poverty to be part of the solution, to gain the necessary trust of our system and hope for the future, so they will venture out and give us their best advice on how to make positive changes. I believe the time has come for communities to honestly reflect on the condition of our civic engagement, to examine how we talk to one another, to explore new ways of engaging those whose opinions differ from our own, to think about the conditions that have led to an atmosphere of disrespect toward each other and toward those who have little voice, and to put in place processes that encourage and respect the full engagement of society and that fosters well-informed conversations about the complicated issues we face. One of my favorite authors is Wendell Berry, who captured this sentiment beautifully when he said, "The revival of community would have to be a revival accomplished by the community itself, not from the outside by the instruction of visiting experts, but from the inside by the ancient rule of neighborliness, by the love of precious things, and by the wish to be at home." Constructive civic dialogue is difficult. Problems such as poverty are complex. There are differing opinions about the causes and the solutions. People and organizations have entrenched and preconceived notions that are difficult to let go. There are inflexible personal and institutional egos for which adaptive change is challenging. However, the default, if we fail to change the nature of our discourse, is continued divisiveness and stalemate with no real progress. I've learned over the years that if we are to accomplish large-scale social change, we must engage in broad, inclusive community conversations. It is my hope that deliberations about LD 1268 will stimulate such an effort and take the action that Jill has suggested. The ingredients for success are in place. There's an urgency for change. There's broad public support for practical common sense programs to assist people with opportunities to leave poverty behind. There are proven collaborative processes we can implement. And there are people and organizations I know are ready for this conversation. We have an opportunity to put politics aside and to implement a well-informed, inclusive approach that will move more people out of poverty, bring stability to their lives, and allow them to give back to the communities where they work and live. Thank you.
So thank you, and we will do our best to answer any questions you might have. As I stated at the beginning, we're aware that the governor has put forward a bill and just had a press conference on that bill that would seek to address the cliff that people face when they're seeking to enter employment. We're pleased that the governor is recognizing this as an issue and is putting forward some different ideas. We're hopeful that people can come together, that legislators, stakeholders, the governor can come together and find a common solution that will work for everybody. That being said, we're just looking at the governor's bill for the first time, so we still need to dig into it, but we have some serious concerns about the approach that the governor takes, as we are concerned that it would actually create a cliff that's more severe for some people who are seeking to leave assistance and go to work. But we're happy to answer any particular questions you might have. My colleague Chris Hassett and I will do our best to field questions, or any of our speakers from this morning.
Why do you think the Representative Gattine's bill is better than the governor's, from what you've seen?
Well, Representative Gattine's bill does a number of things. It's multi-pronged, so it doesn't just address the cliff that we've been talking about, but it also works to really address the fact to help people move into employment. It creates a navigator system to help people transition, make that transition. It creates an approach that will move people, advance people once they go into employment, so they're actually able to move forward and succeed. And the reason we believe this approach is better is because when you look at the way that the cliff is addressed, the approach that's put forward in Representative Gattine's bill will actually work to eliminate or work to diminish the cliff effect so that people are able to transition to work. When you look at the proposal put forward by the governor, it appears as though it would actually create a more severe cliff for a number of families because of the way the disregards work. I don't know if you want to talk about disregards more.
The governor says that his bill has a work requirement. Senator Gattine's bill does not have a work requirement. Like to look for work, to actually do that.
There's
To
already
get
a
the
work
benefits.
requirement.
There's already a work requirement in the TANF program, and I think folks know that. People are required to work either 20 or 30 hours a week, depending on the age of their children, and that is in place currently in Maine law. So there is currently a work requirement. What the governor's bill does is predicate whether or not you get relief from the cliff when you go to work as to whether or not you're actually meeting those requirements. Now, many people cannot meet those requirements. You're all familiar with the experience of this economy, where there are lots and lots of people trying to find full-time work who cannot. And so if you found an 18-hour-a-week job under the governor's bill, you would likely lose your assistance. Under Representative Gattine's bill, you would get support to stabilize your family so you could move forward, take more hours without penalty. But you'd start from a place of being supported. And that's the difference that I think is so significant.
And if you were making 18 hours a week, you'd actually get less under his bill than you would currently.
That's right.
I mean, it actually takes us backwards for people, the person that Chris just suggested who finds a job that, gives that individual 18 hours a week, they would actually they would have a harder time under this proposal than is currently law, because we currently have an earnings disregard for people in those situations. That would go away under this proposal, under the governor's.
How far down does that earnings disregard go right now? Is it like 5 hours, or 5 or 10, 15? Is there a cutoff at all?
It's anyone who's working. So the goal is to, whatever work you can find, whatever you can do, we want to encourage that and support that.
So currently there is some income disregard if you work less than 20 hours, but under the governor's bill there would be none. Is that what?
There would be none for people who are working less than 20 hours. And currently we have modest disregards in place that don't go as far as a lot of states have gone with respect to earning disregards.
That's $108 per month.
108 and then 50% thereafter of the remainder.
Are there other examples where you see this as making the cliff more severe? in the governor's office?
I think the best thing to say about that is that the governor's bill does not address some of the other cliffs that are addressed in Representative Gattine's bill. For example, in the case of two-parent families, a two-parent family can go to work and lose assistance simply because they're a two-parent family, when if they were a single-parent family, they'd continue to qualify financially for TANF. There is a penalty that's associated with being a two-parent family that knocks lots of those families off when they're still as poor, and their kids in those families are still as poor as single-parent families. That cliff needs to be addressed, because that has the totally counterproductive effect of causing families to split up, or putting so much pressure on them that they're not able to stay together. The governor's bill also does not address, as Representative Gattine's does, a big problem in the child care world today, where parents go to work and they need child care right away, but there's a long delay often before that child care eligibility is determined and people start to get their care. Unlike any other public benefit program that I'm aware of, those benefits, once they're determined down the road, several weeks, are not retroactive to the date the person was first eligible, the date she went to work and first needed it. So she starts work with a huge debt, or her child care provider has to float that family when she can't afford, the child care provider can't likely afford to do that either. Representative Gattine's bill deals with that problem to stabilize people in employment by giving them child care benefits retroactively so they can pay their debt and start out in a situation where they're able financially to make things work.
It also addresses transportation issues.
It also addresses transportation. The governor's bill, to its credit, and we're grateful to see this, again, another point of common ground, extends a transitional transportation benefit. That is good for people, and we support. However, it completely fails to address one of the biggest problems that people getting TANF face, and that's that they don't have a car at all. So reimbursing for transportation doesn't help if you can't drive a car to work. What Representative Gattine's bill does is look around the country, including all around New England, at some of the most successful models, like the Good News Garage, that helps people get access to automobiles, purchase cars, get car donations, puts them in a car so they have a way to get to work.
Incredibly important in our rural state.
30,000-foot view, guys, I mean, how much overlap is there between what the governor's trying to do and what Representative Gattine and you guys are trying to do? I mean, are you confident that there's enough in that middle of that Venn diagram you guys can get something through that both sides can be happy with?
You know, there is disparity, there is overlap, there is some common ground. We're hopeful. You know, we want everyone to put politics aside and to come together and to really be thoughtful in coming up with an effective solution that's going to address the very real problems that exist. So it is our hope that we could, you know, the people can come together and find some common ground, because there's a stated goal, and that we're all saying, okay, this is an issue. People are facing barriers. People who want to be working are facing barriers that are making that challenging. So how can we address that? And there is some overlap, and how can we come together and find more and create more common ground and get this figured out?
Kind of a philosophical question. People have been talking about a welfare cliff for years, and it seems that whether Democrats have been in power, Republicans in power, regardless who's governor, it's not been addressed. Why? Have you folks pushed to have it addressed and nobody's listened, or why is it taking this long for both sides to get into it?
Well, thank you, good question. But I just want to say that is not the only problem in this system. And in 1996, you'll recall when the federal government enacted federal welfare reform, Maine came together, legislators came together on a bipartisan basis to produce what is touted throughout the country as one of the best reforms in the nation. And that's because it built the Parents and Scholars Program. It's because it built a whole network of transitional supports for people going to work. And it built other systems like the Alternative Aid Program that is again under attack in this legislative session, that really are help and support for people going to work. But those supports, it's not just one simple solution. This cliff is not the solution at all, but it is the next important step. We did in 1996 and again in 2000 mess around with in the statute, improved the disregards. But it has been 15 years since we've looked at those. Other states, including southern states, have made significant advancements in improving that benefit. It is time now to take that next step. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that we have not been doing anything in here in Maine. Unfortunately, in the last few years, in our view, we've been moving backwards. I think the good news about the governor's bill today is that it signals an approach that the campaigns are done. This is not going to be about this conversation should not be about politics. There's common ground, there's opportunity, and we need to grab that and run with it.
Chris, do you have, or could you get your hands on any scenarios about what kind of income levels send someone over the cliff currently? Like, single mother of 2 kids or a 2-parent household, how much money when do you start going over the cliff now?
Okay, so this is a complicated conversation, and I'm going to teach you how to calculate TANF rates after this press conference, and it'll be fun. But let me just answer your question too simplistically to say that once a family starts earning $1,023, a family of 3, $1,023, that's almost 40% below the federal poverty level. They fall off the cliff. They earn they earn $1,024, they're done with TANF. And that is a travesty when you recognize that we're throwing kids into even deeper poverty. They're going to have less money than they did when they were getting TANF.
So when you ask philosophical questions, you're getting into my realm. I'm not an expert on the details like Chris and the other folks at MEJP, but it's sort of thinking about your question, I think that overall, over the last 10, 15 years, and in recent times especially, the reason this issue hasn't gotten dealt with, the reason so many issues that are really rooted in poverty, a systemic poverty and inequality, is because we allow the debate to get hijacked by false dichotomies. Like, my bill says they have to work, their bill says they don't. Like, poor people are to blame for their problems, people who are lucky enough to get to pay taxes worked for everything they had with no help. These are sort of, it's a kind of a false pitting of us against them, rather than some of what Joel was talking about, which is the need for our politics to reflect what I think our people understand at a deep level, which is something is really broken when we've been working at welfare reform for 20 plus years, and we have more poor people than we had before. Something is broken, and it affects all of us. And until we get into that, this is a problem for all of us rather than us against them, we get the politics we deserve. And I think that's why we haven't fixed it yet. I think today shows a glimmer of hope about common ground, and a glimmer of hope that we can all agree that, at the very least, for people who are ready to work, have been lucky enough to find a job, let's help them get there. Let's help them keep going on that path. It's something we would all want, and we're looking forward to working towards that end. Let this be the year we get past the false us against them way of thinking about poverty.